was going to start with a joke about the name of the room because it sounds delicious, but I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's gnocchi or something like that. And also, I don't really want to talk about food anymore because the lunch was so awesome. I just ate a bit too much. So it's already been a very long conference. I hope you had a lot of great talks so far, and this is actually, I think, the last round before the keynote. So I'd like to start with a little bit of a story, just to have an easy start with the talk. And I would like to talk, well, not about Python, but something that sounds like it. I would like to talk about pirates. So this is maybe a quintessential pirate, as you know it. It's a drawing, but it's actually based on a real-life person. And his name was Cornelis Jol. He was a Dutch guy. And while researching this talk, I actually found out that we are related. So we actually have family connections together, which is not that surprising because he's from a very small town in the Netherlands, and my mother's family is from that same fishing village, and I don't really want to think about all the family connections that we may share historically in such a close community. But anyway, he was a real pirate. He looks the part, right? His nickname was Houtenbeen, or wooden leg, or leg pack, and he is actually one of the first documented pirates that had a wooden leg. So that was actually a thing that existed back then. So if you have a sword fight and you get a nasty cut, well, sometimes it's better to take the leg off, and then you still have to walk. But anyway, he really looks like a pirate. But there's actually some debate about whether or not this is an actual pirate. He looks the part. And for us Pythonistas, it's an easy question to answer because we have duck typing. If it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, well, then it's a duck. Well, this guy, he definitely walked like a pirate, he talked like a pirate, he plundered like a pirate, he robbed like a pirate, he killed like a pirate. So, using our duck typing logic, this is definitely a pirate duck. But in reality, if you want to be historically accurate, things are not actually that clear. And the actual answer, well, it's quite interesting, it's quite of a novelty, but the discussion about whether or not this guy is a pirate actually has a lot of insights in the world today. Because today we have a very similar situation on our hands. So that's why I would like to talk a little bit about whether or not we should call this guy a pirate, and then translate it back to our threats that we have in our current geopolitical situation. So to understand this guy, we have to travel back to the age of discovery, or the age of exploration. So this is a photo of a replica of the ship that Christopher Columbus used to sail west across the Atlantic in the hopes of finding the Indies. Well, he actually found the Americas, but as you can see, it must be quite terrifying to step on a ship like that and embark on a journey across the seas, not knowing where you might end up. But as much as I love exploration, in reality, a lot of, in this day and age, was just about money. Because what we wanted to do is we wanted to trade. We wanted to get the spice trade. Actually, in the Netherlands, we call the last period of this age of discovery, we call it our golden age. It's when you get famous paintings like this one. This is the Night Watch by Rembrandt. Now, if you want to hurt your throat, you should try the Dutch pronunciation. It's Nachtwacht. So try that sometimes. And by the way, we still call this the golden age because we earned a lot of money. But for me personally, we were not just trading spices, but we were also trading our fellow human beings. So whether or not we should continue to call it the golden age, I don't know. But anyway, I digress. What we really have to talk about is that with money and with trade and with the economic situation, there was a geopolitical situation. With many, many, many great players in the world, Spain, Italy, France, England, the Netherlands, and what have you, they were all basically just fighting it out for the spice trade and other types of trade all around the world. They all wanted to control that situation. Now, back in the day, the best way to travel long distances was by ship. So what did we have to do? We have to fight. That's why we have a lot of famous sea battles happening at the time. And we were literally, because we've just invented or stole the invention of gunpowder, blowing up each other's ships. But building a navy is very expensive. And in fact, a lot of the naval engagements we get in that time weren't done with actual naval ships owned by the state. And the reason for that is actually really simple. Building ships and boats is really expensive. This is a period of great change, a lot of regime changes over time. There wasn't a lot of money belonging to the state, to the republics or the kingdoms. So we had to turn to something else. Luckily, we were a very enterprising folk. We had a lot of entrepreneurs. So here you see an image of the first, what they call the first modern stock exchange. This is the Stock Exchange of Amsterdam. It opened at the start of the 17th century in 1608. So we were really doing business by then. And actually, we call this the first modern stock exchange, but if you go fairly close here to Venice, we already had money lenders that were trading debts and credits and stuff all over the place. So that's even a little bit debatable as well. But anyway, so what do? You are a state, you don't have money, but you do want to wage war. Well, you do the same thing as we do now, you privatize. And that is what happened back then as well. So rather than just having a navy, we would basically legitimize pirates. We would give them a letter of marque and reprisal is what we call it, or a kapersbrief in Dutch, because we Dutch were really good at it as well. And basically what it meant is, you are just allowed to do your pirate thing. You can plunder other ships, you can plunder coastal villages, you can be an actual pirate under one condition, and that is that you do it to the other guy. So we have all these geopolitical tensions, and we legitimize pirates, we give them a pretty letter, and we tell them, now you can do it to the other guy. And one very famous pirate, or we should actually call him a privateer or a corsair, was Sir Francis Drake. He hailed from England, and here he is with his loot from a Spanish ship. This is really a testament to how well respected these guys were. Sir Francis Drake was an important guy in England at the time. He's actually the second person to circumnavigate the globe. Not the first, but the second is still very impressive for the time. So he was a well-respected pirate. And the reason he could do that is because he had the permission of England. And that meant that he had a safe haven. Because as you probably know from your favorite Disney movie, the typical punishment for piracy is death. We really didn't look kindly towards pirates. So it was really a good thing to have safe havens where you could go into port, unload your stuff. You did have to pay taxes. There has to be something in it for the king or the republic, obviously. But now you had a safe haven where you can just offload your goods. There were legal procedures for the ships you captured, so they became your property and you could sell them off. And you can recruit sailors, because now suddenly, rather than being this outlaw living in the periphery of society, you can offer people an actual job. So this was really an important aspect of these privateers. They had safe havens. Now obviously, if you're on the other side, if you're the enemy, you'd just call them pirates. And they were really a menace, so there were often conditions of just putting them to death anyway. Now, you might think that these pirates were just plundering ships, but they actually also did naval engagements. So Sir Francis Drake, the guy that we just saw, he led, as an admiral, he led several attacks against the Spanish, and in one of them, he took 25 ships, and 23 of them were not naval ships. They were actually private ships, just being paid to pillage and raid Spain. And there was a very famous privateer group in modern-day France, but it was the Spanish lowlands back then, here in Dunkirk, who were very famous. And it's mainly because the channel here is very small. There are a lot of boats going through here, so it's ideal to plunder some boats because they cannot really escape very well. And this is an important point, because you might think, well, on the geopolitical landscape, pirates that are basically just part of a national navy, they will engage other naval vessels, big ships, big merchants, but actually these guys, they also attacked the small guys. So this is a herring vessel, and in the Netherlands we used to have a very big industry of herring fishing, but by the by about 1650, the second half of the 17th century, it was completely wiped out by these pirates or privateers. So much so that Dunkirk was besieged multiple times by multiple nations. This is a famous Battle of Dunkirk where the English and the Dutch teamed up to finally destroy the pirates. They didn't succeed. But anyway, this truly had an impact on the regular person in that day and age. Here you see just a fisherman along the coast. You can imagine that if you completely wipe out an industry, that it's going to have an economic but also an impact just on the available food at the time. So why is this so important? Well, we typically think about pirates as outlaws, but if you really think about it, this was another pirate. They were actually well respected within their societies. They could hold high offices, they could have trusted earnings. So it made piracy a lot easier. Now, if we travel back to our modern days, we still have a geopolitical playing field filled with tensions. We have some actual wars out there, terrible wars, but we also have a lot of geopolitical players who are clearly in opposition with each other, fighting over the same resources, but they're not fighting an actual war. We don't have that many pirates anymore. They're still there, but chances are if you call yourself a pirate, then you're a different kind of pirate. We have to realize that actually maybe we should say that we are still at war. So this is a book. It was published just before the pandemic, and it's called There's a War Going On, but No One Can See It. And this is because the current day political playing field no longer is the ocean. They're still important, but what's really important now is the internet. And we've probably all heard the major geopolitical players fighting with each other, having intelligence agencies opening up enormous campaigns of political influencing on social media and stuff like that. So in a way, the war has moved from the ocean into the seas of the internet. But there's a little bit of a catch in thinking in that way, because when you think about states fighting it out, you might think about state actors and intelligence operations, firing off attack after attack, trying to manipulate the people or trying to destroy critical infrastructure. But if you think that way, you might think that you are safe. You might work for a small company. Maybe you think, well, my project isn't really important. Russia or China or the US or whatever geopolitical opponent your country might have is not interested in what I do. You might feel quite safe because you think this will all go over your head. But in fact, we still have privateers these days. So what we see these days is that in this geopolitical landscape, there are independent, private hacking groups that target small businesses with malware, with ransomware, with all sorts of tools, and they are more or less condoned by their own country under the condition that they attack the other side. So just like we had pirates back then, we still have our privateers today. And just like profit back then was enough to attack that small fishing boat just to have a boat or a boatload of herring, these days they can still attack small companies as long as they can extract some money for profit from it. So the current day geopolitical landscape, with all its players, shouldn't make you feel safe as a small player. We really are still engaged in a lot of cyber attacks. And in fact, a Dutch bank just released a press statement, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, 2 weeks ago, that in 2024, 1 in 5 Dutch companies was actually harmed by a cyber attack. Now, they're very opaque about their numbers, so I shouldn't trust them. They probably have some kind of angle here, and they probably want your money as well. But still, a lot of companies are, in this day and age, attacked by cybersecurity. And it's not just the little guy, the big guy, I'm sorry. So all this is to say that you should really care about security. I'm going to now, and I can almost hear you think, What's that? Did you really just tell me that I should care about security? I already care about security. Come on, man, what are you doing? Don't waste my time. I'm here for an interesting talk. Don't tell me what I already know. And I agree with you. If you're here in this room, you probably already care about security. I care about security deeply. I'm not a security expert. I'm just a software engineer and tech lead with a deep interest in security. And I've worked in high security environments and stuff like that. But still, I think that we all care about security. I should have added the popcorn earlier. Anyway, but if you think about it, what is caring about security? I mean, look at myself. I care about the environment. I deeply care about the environment, but I still flew out here. So what is caring about the environment if my actions don't actually line up with my beliefs, right? And it's a bit of an ethical sidestep here, and I'm kind of attacking myself, my own morality here. But what is caring if your actions don't really reflect that care at all? And in fact, this is how the security community looks at developers. So here I got quite a juicy quote for you from a security expert, and it says, "You know how it goes." Oh, sorry. Mention security to your typical developer, and you're likely to be met with an eye roll at best, or puzzlement at worst. Generally, the whole security thing is seen as someone else's problem. Now, this is quite a quote, I have to say. So, do I agree with this quote? Well, I don't know. I think in one way to describe this is that there's always an us versus them in any sort of in-group, out-group situation. I mean, we do it ourselves. Typically, when our applications fail, we say something, oh, it's all about the user. The problem exists between the keyboard and the chair, or we make fun of Java programmers. So there's probably some kind of in-group, out-group bias going on in the security crowd. But this guy is not alone. If you listen to a security conference, if you go to talks there, and I don't mean DEF CON looking at the neat little exploits they have now, which is also really cool, but the security conferences that have to do with enterprise security, they really talk about developers as if they don't care about security, as if you have to work around developers to get your company secure. So we can care about security, but apparently we don't act like it. But I think that is actually an interesting question. Why do developers behave as if they don't care about security? And I think this is a vital question to understand what's going wrong and what we can do better as developers, and what we should do better as developers. And to understand this, I think we have to take a little bit of a sidestep into industrial safety. And there they have a really popular term, and it's called a safety culture. And this is a really important term in industrial safety. And this doesn't just mean trying to sum up how the safety is in a company, but if you have a good safety culture, the entire company believes in the importance of safety, is trying to work towards safety, but, and this is also important, they're also doing risk-benefit analysis. But they're not just skipping the risk analysis in order to get benefits, but they're really conscious about safety. And in fact, this can be really important, because if you don't, you can have a company-ending disaster. So this is a chemical company in the Netherlands, and it blew up, as you can see. And what I find quite funny here, there's a Dutch slogan of the company here, and in the slogan they say that they are to be trusted handling chemical products. And I think this is quite to the contrary here. So this company in the accident report had a very bad safety culture. So while they did everything according to regulations, they didn't really take it seriously, and it had an effect on the entire company. So people working at the lowest levels, they might do the checklist, they might not, they really didn't find it important, and then they made a mistake and the entire factory blew up. And this is also what happened here with BP. They had the Deepwater Horizon accident. I hope most of you are old enough to remember it. but they lost nearly half of their value after this accident, and there were even predictions that they were going to go bankrupt just from this accident alone. So a safety culture in industrial safety is really important, but it's not something that just comes about. You really have to care deeply about safety. And in fact, we have something similar in security, and it's called a security culture. And in a security culture, the entire company is aware of how important security is. Not just us developers, not just the security officer, not just the security experts, but also the C-level officers. And this means that you can have a normal conversation about security and do a risk-benefit analysis of adding additional protections to your company. Here, obviously, often it's not a company-ending disaster, but I mean, if you manage to screw up the trust in your main product, I think it can be quite devastating. So I'm not actually sure if on the inside of the company they had a bad security culture. I cannot look within their company. But it's quite a thing. As a password manager, you say, trust me, give me all your passwords, and then you have a series of breaches. It's not good for trust. And then there's the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. They actually had to pay a lot of money to get their data back. The entire research and educational university was shut down for a long time. And this was a very elaborate attack in which the hacking group took about 2 to 3 months to slowly gain access to their entire network and then to shut everything down. This does have a twist. Just 3 months ago, they got their Bitcoin back, and Bitcoin gained a lot of value, so they actually made a profit on the Bitcoin. So it was worth about 3 times as much, but they still say that it was a net loss because they had to spend a lot of money getting everything up and running again. So a good security culture is important, the culture in which we as developers are allowed to say, well, you know, we should spend some time fixing the security here. But that's difficult because I don't always get that time. I have a product owner, I have stakeholders. If I say, well, maybe I should go to a conference and learn about security for a few weeks, dive into courses, maybe we should take more time implementing these features and analyzing the security risks, maybe we should hire security experts, then I'm not always getting what I want. So there is something that we can do here as a developer. And this is quite important. So what can you do as a developer? Obviously, you are important for security because you are the one implementing the code that you write, right? So if you make a mistake, if you try to make your own authentication and you create a hole in your application, and obviously you're going to screw up. But I think you have a bigger task. I kind of lost a thread in my story, but I'm just going to roll with it anyway. So I think that you as a developer have a responsibility to contribute to the security of your organization. But then what I commonly hear is that, well, in order for us to do that, you have to be a security expert, right? You have to know a lot about security. And this is really a problem because we live in a world where we developers have to do a lot of stuff in addition to just writing code. And here you have a tweet back from the days where Twitter was actually useful from Kelsey Hightower. And here he says, well, basically we can shift everything to the left. We can shift all the responsibilities on developers. But the idea that developers have to become security experts, well, it really just isn't sustainable. Well, I think that you don't have to become a security expert to contribute to security. And I think this is really important. I think that what we should do as developers, what is our professional responsibility, is that we should argue for security. And that is our main thing. So as I am standing here, I'm trying to be an advocate for security. You should be an advocate for security in your organization. We all deal with product owners. We all deal with stakeholders. And in fact, we are all stakeholders in our own code as well. If I make a huge mistake that allows an attacker to cripple the entire system of my company, that makes my application the gateway to a big ransomware attack, do you know who they are going to call? Do you know who they are going to fire, maybe? it's me. So I also have a very big stake in security in my company. So I think that it is our professional responsibility to step up and argue for security, and advocate for security and reason with that product owner. We shouldn't let ourselves be a doormat for delivering features. Obviously, we are not always going to be heard. And if you don't, I'm a consultant, so I can deal with that. Put something in writing. Just write something down, including your arguments. Mail it to your product owner or to a manager. I think that's really important as well. Because if you discuss it over the phone, over a meeting, well, then a year later it never happened. So we should really stand up for security. But in order to do that, we do need to learn a little bit about security. So that is what the rest of the talk is going to focus on, is how can you actually learn enough about security to argue for security. Now, in the tweet you just read, there's an important term, and it's called shift left. And it's fairly simple. In the traditional sense of the word, we were doing security late in the project. So what we were doing is we were developing a project, we were designing a project, implementing it. We were finally ready to ship the project, to put it into production, and then someone said, hey, let's do a pen test. Maybe we should figure out if there are any holes in this project. The problem with that is that it's very expensive. So if you now find some mistake, you have to go back and change your code, which is very difficult, can go wrong. So rather than that, we should shift left the security to earlier in the project and take it into account when designing it. In fact, if you listen to a lot of security experts these days, they say that you have to start left, because if you shift it left and then stop with your security, you get back into the same project. So what you should do is you should make security a topic throughout your entire software development lifecycle. And if you do that, if you manage to do that well, if you consider security at every point in your software security lifecycle, you should end up with something that looks like this, a fortress, where you have, and this is an important term in security, defense in depth. This is also something that often goes wrong. So if you look at this fortress here, you have an outer wall, you have a moat, you have an inner castle. So if you are an attacker and you want to attack this castle, then you first have to get past the moat, then you have to climb a wall. Maybe there are guards on the wall that will shoot you down, then you have to climb down. Then you're in an open courtyard, but the castle itself is also fortified, so you will still be attacked by archers from here. Then you have to make it past the heavy gates and into the building. So there truly is defense in depth. But if I look at a lot of systems that I encountered, I spend a lot of time hardening the outside, but once we're dealing with applications on the inside, they are not as secure. And those applications, those are typically the applications that allow an attacker to spread their influence. And that is due to something very fundamental in these things. And this is another thing I borrowed from industrial safety. It's the Swiss cheese model. And what it basically says is that we have multiple layers of defense against something bad happening. And in every layer, there are always going to be holes. But it's only when those holes line up that we get all the way through all the layers to a disaster. So what we should do is we should minimize the number of holes that each layer has, and then the chance that all the lines line up to a disaster is as small as possible. In industrial safety, we separate those two things in latent conditions, which we have too, things like outdated packages, zero-day vulnerabilities. They're basically everywhere, and active failures. So we as humans, we make a lot of mistakes. In the the University of Maastricht example, the very first entry point was just a professor who was spearphished to open an email and install something on his computer. So we have to account for this, and we also have to account for the fact that our strong outer layer is riddled with holes, and we really have to do something about that. And that's why security in depth is so important. Even if you're developing an internal tool that's run on the network, you should make sure that it's secure, because maybe that internal tool has access to some other parts of the system that are interesting for the attackers. So once they're in via some route, and they can then hack your tool and use that to jump to another application, you could still be in a lot of trouble. Now, if you want to read more about this, this is a book that I highly recommend. It's by James Reason, the one who came up with that model, and it's also very relevant to security products. So what can you do to prevent holes in your product? Well, for me, there are 3 basic categories of what we can do as developers that are really easy to do. And the first one is to learn secure design principles. And this is really important and also really easy to do, and then you can just apply it in your work. And the second one is to adopt mature security practices. And this is really fun because you can automate a lot of it. And that's really important. Make security boring for yourself. And the third thing is to know how to mitigate common vulnerabilities. So if we talk about learning secure design principles, what can we do? Now, there are many secure design principles out there, and I'm not going to explain all of them to you because you're much better in just practicing and reading them all, but I do want to highlight a few. And it's, for instance, this one. It's the know unless principle. And this is a really important principle because most of the Python packages that we use don't apply it. And that's an important realization. I'm a big user of web and API frameworks. I've used Django, Flask, Fast API, Bottle, Falcon. I've used a lot of frameworks. And in most frameworks, what happens is if you add a new endpoint and you add it to your router, then your endpoint is accessible to everyone. So rather than being a no unless, it's a yes unless. You have to actively add something to your endpoint to secure it. And it can typically be a decorator to your function. It can be a class a mix-in class that you add to the class list. But if you forget to do that, then suddenly you have an endpoint that's not supposed to be public that is now suddenly public. And in fact, the best example of that I've seen was where a framework had a mix-in with a template method. So you had to implement the template method that actually checked for the security, and then your mix-in class would call the method. What I've seen is that someone made a mistake in the name of that method. And what happened is that the method never was called at all. And the default of that framework was, well, then we'll just allow the user. And they had unit tests for that template method that also contained the typo. So if you really want to code securely, think about the no unless principle. Rather than doing yes unless, always default to no, unless you have something that explicitly gives attention. Now, there are many more of these secure design principles. I would recommend you to learn about those. How can you adopt mature security practices? Well, first of all, I wouldn't invent them myself. I would just look at industry standards, and we have quite a few of those. One that we have is the ISO 27001, which is a standard, and it's important, but it's really abstract. So if I read the standard, I have no idea how to implement it myself, right? But luckily, there are other standards that we can use that are closer to what we're doing. So we have the OWASP, Software Assurance Maturity Model, the OWASP SAM. And by the way, OWASP stands for Open Worldwide Application Security Project, and they have an awesome logo. They're called OWASP, so their logo is an O with a WASP in it. I think it's quite nice. And this framework already has things that make a lot more sense to me, like create a formal definition of the build process so that it becomes consistent and repeatable. So I now already know something. I have to do something with my build process. It has to become consistent and repeatable, nice goals, but how do I do that? Well, for that, there's actually another model, and it's much closer to the doing. It's the OWASP DevSecOps Maturity Model, or DSOM for short. If you find that model, you'll find a principle, and we'll move out of the way, that is pinning of artifacts. And what this means is that if you're using dependencies, like your Python packages, but also your Docker images, and if you're building artifacts yourself, please pin them to specific versions, preferably with hashes. Because now we are way closer to the consistent and repeatable builds that we so need. So, and by the way, I adapted this slide with permission from Timo Pagel, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He is one of the DSOM the OSD, some project leads from OWASP. And I want to highlight a little bit how the OWASP DevSecOps model works, so you know how to use it for yourself. So that model, which is really close to what we do as developers, has a number of dimensions, like build and deploy, culture and organization. Don't skip that one. I know we're developers, and it sounds really soft skills, but it's really important. And these dimensions, they are split up into multiple sub-dimensions. So here we have the build and deploy dimension. It has sub-dimensions, and one of those is, for instance, patch management. If you look at that model, you will further see that it has some maturity levels. And to reach each maturity level, it has actual practices that you can implement tomorrow in your projects that will make your security better. For instance, here we have nightly builds. If you don't have nightly builds yet with your pipelines, please look into it. Because what often happens is when we're working on an application and we're actively developing it, we're running pipelines all the time, our scanners run all the time. But once an application gets closer to completion, if there's such a thing, then a version of the application might run in production for quite a while. And those pipelines will never run again. And that means that our security scanners will never run again. But there are new vulnerabilities discovered almost every day. So if you implement a nightly build, you get a nightly pipeline that will just rerun the pipeline, and every morning you can simply check, hey, did my security scanner find something new? Now there are way more advanced practices also in here, but a nightly build is really a quick win that you can do in almost every situation. Another one, in the culture and organization one, there's a sub-dimension called design, and I personally think this is the most important thing that you can do, and it's something called threat modeling. So if you think about security culture, the only way you can take a reasoned decision if you know how much risk you are taking. And if you do a threat modeling session, in that case, you analyze your project for the weak spots. And basically, and this is really easy to do. You don't need to be an expert. There are guides online. So if you've never done a threat modeling session for your project, please get some developers together, maybe a security expert from your company, but they're really not needed for this, and do a simple threat modeling session. And this can really help. So if you want to make a change to caching, you know, there are two hard things in computer science, caching, naming things, and off by one errors. So I screwed up that joke. Then you should maybe do a threat modeling session, because otherwise you're going to be Steam. They thought, well, we have a Christmas session coming up. We don't want our systems overloaded. Let's tweak the caching. And they started caching your account details and credit card information and payment details and stuff like that. So if you did a threat modeling session, you would have probably seen that this was potentially dangerous. And maybe you would have implemented tests, like a security unit test, that would verify that the pages that should never be cached are not cached, but because it's quite easy to make mistakes in configuration, especially if you then have to check an entire website for mistakes. Right, now finally, because I'm running out of time, no common vulnerabilities. There are a lot of top 10 lists for APIs, for web applications, for data, and stuff like that. Know them, not because you might encounter them, because it will help you shape the way you think about security. And don't just learn about them, learn how to mitigate them. And preferably, spin up something that allows you to try to find those vulnerabilities in actual live applications. So OWASP has something called Juice Shop, which is an intentionally vulnerable web shop that has many of the vulnerabilities in there that you will find in those lists. Try to find them. It will really teach you something about those vulnerabilities. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. So we all want to do login, right? Don't code it yourself. So if you're doing SQL and you want to avoid SQL injection, don't write your own regex to clean your inputs. Use a framework that does it for you. And the last one, and this is probably the most difficult one, if you do make a mistake. If you've introduced a vulnerability in an application, please share it with your colleagues. Educate them on what you've done, on how you fixed it, because if you don't, someone else is going to make the same mistake 2 months later. For this, you do already need to have a security culture in place, because otherwise there's a blame culture and you might want to hide your mistakes. But if you do one thing, go out there and share it with others. Well, closing remarks, because I know I'm over time. Take it slow. Don't try to do everything at once. If you suddenly implement all the maturity levels from OWASP, and you have a pipeline that you just mandate for the entire company that suddenly has 20 security tools, you're going to get 1 million alerts. And the only thing that you're going to accomplish is that people learn how to ignore all those alerts. So do it slowly, one step at a time. Be pragmatic. Don't strive for perfection. We still have a cost-benefit analysis here. And be vocal. If you care about security, share that message with others. Don't skip the mandatory training of your corporation. Yeah, it's a little bit boring. There's not much in there, but by giving off that kind of mentality, that security is something to be annoyed about, you're not going to get your colleagues on board. So please be vocal about a security culture. And with that, that's it. My name was Sebastiaan. Thank you very much. You can reach me here and have a great keynote, I guess. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastiaan. There is a question on Slido, and maybe we have time for one more question from the audience, if you have one. So can you provide some references on design practices for security?
So coming up with references here live is really difficult, because then I have to remember URLs and stuff like that. But what I would do if I were you, if you want to know about secure design principles, if you put that in any a search engine and maybe add software engineering to it, you're going to find a lot of resources. It's not difficult to find. OWASP has a lot of good resources, but they're typically less applied for developers. So they're more about security, less about doing secure coding. But quite honestly, it's not difficult to find. And I'm going to think about compiling a list, so reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever, and I will share some URLs with you, because that's more difficult to do live.
Okay, thank you. There are some questions in the audience.
You mentioned a few times there's always a balance and trade-off, right? How do you deal with the trade-off? Like, in security, you don't know what you don't know, right? That's where the danger lies. And like, how deep do you want to go? Because you can spend a lot of time and still not know if you're secure or not. So what's your general key for basically on the size of the company, right? How big the danger is? How would you describe this trade-off?
Well, that's actually an excellent question, and this is one of the most difficult questions, but you're probably asking it with a reason. So I think what we can do here is look to industrial safety, and this is kind of where I lost my thread in my explanation earlier. So what you want to do is you want to analyze the threats that you have, and then you want to analyze the probability of the threats, but also the potential consequences of those threats. And the last one is really important, because that can help you estimate whether or not it's worth it to spend a lot of time on. So for me, it starts probably with a threat modeling session for an application or a service, where you just take a whiteboard, maybe get a couple of stickies out, and you just try to think of what are the kinds of threats that we have in this application, and what are the consequences of those threats. What are the risks? What are the financial losses? What's going on there? And that should provide a guide, a framework or guidelines for what's important to you, and then you start prioritizing. It's very difficult to know what you sorry. If you don't know what you don't know, that's very difficult, but you can reason about, well, this is dealing with a lot of customer information. It's a high value database. Some hacker's probably going to be interested in it, and if it gets leaked, I'm going to get a huge fine, about 10%, I don't know, it's a lot of money, 10% of the revenue or something in a year. Then that's probably something that you want to spend more time on. If there's not much valuable, not so much valuable information in there, well, maybe don't bother. So I would look at that and then compare that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sebastian. And I mean, we finished. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.